Hey guys, it is I, Kuroninja, and there are some people who think I'm acting like a tsundere whenever I talk about Shinken Red. I have mentioned how Takeru Shiba is one of the better Red Rangers out there, but that's like finding a diamond in a landfill, because there are no good Red Rangers in Super Sentai. Just because I like Takeru doesn't mean I think he's a good Red Ranger or anything, so I thought I wanted to make that clear before we continue the review. And now that we got that out of the way, it's time to continue reviewing Shinkengers, starting off from episode 25. This episode starts with Takeru preparing for his eventual duel with Juzo while Ryunosuke and Chiaki watch. Meanwhile, Mako and Kotoha are wondering what drove Juzo to become a Gedoshu. In the Sanzu River, Dokoku is upset at Dayu for not finishing off Juzo, and so damages her shamisen. Dayu then leaves for the surface to repair it, so Dokoku sends out an Ayakashi with the power to put people to sleep. The Shinkengers then find the Ayakashi, who ends up putting a lot of people to sleep, including Genta. However, his main target seems to be Dayu, as Mako also ends up getting hit by the same sleep mist. The Ayakashi will enter the dream world to devour people in their sleep, so Takeru uses Mojikara to send Ryunosuke and Chiaki into the dream world. From here, the plot kind of diverges into three separate plot lines, so I will try and cover them one by one. First off, Ryunosuke and Chiaki enter the dream world and find the Ayakashi. He tries to defeat the Shinkengers by using the power of dreams, but then Chiaki realizes he can also do whatever he wants in the dream world, so the Ayakashi is chased out of there and he continues the fight against the two Shinkengers in the overworld. But the Shinkengers manage to wake everyone up by cutting off the part that releases the sleep mist. Next up, Mako is also in the dream world, but then she notices a shroud of darkness and ends up in Dayu's dream, where she finds out the incident that turned her into Gedoshu. It turns out Dayu used to be someone named Usuyuki who killed a man named Shinza out of jealousy by setting his household on fire. Then she turned into a Gedoshu while holding him in her arms, and the shamisen was infused with his soul. The two of them wake up and fight. Dayu almost finishes off Mako, but she is saved by Kotoha. Lastly, Takeru has used up a lot of energy from sending Ryunosuke and Chiaki into the dream world. When Genta wakes up, Chitari takes advantage of Takeru's weakness by summoning some giant monsters. Takeru then becomes Super Shinken Red, and he and Genta pilot Daikaio by themselves. This uses up a lot of energy, but then Juzo shows up to fight Takeru. Now this was a very eventful episode, and despite being about an Ayakashi who puts people to sleep, it did anything but. I was also surprised because for the first time we got a Mako-focused episode where she didn't share the spotlight with anyone else. I know she didn't get that much screen time, but based on the opening and the fact that the preview emphasized Mako's storyline, I will consider this a Mako episode. When I started watching this episode, I thought it would also focus on Mako. It starts with her doubting herself since she hesitated in her fight against Dayu, but the episode actually focuses more on Takeru and Ryunosuke. Juzo is almost about to fight Takeru, but he is interrupted by some Nanashi and decides that the fight will happen the next day. Ryunosuke doesn't want Takeru to go, but Mako makes the call that Takeru should have his duel with Juzo. Ryunosuke is then entrusted with Inromaru, and the Shinkengers go off to fight the Ayakashi from the last episode. Ryunosuke then finishes him off as Super Shinken Blue. Meanwhile, Takeru and Juzo are having their duel, and it seems like Juzo has won, but Takeru reveals that he let himself get hit on purpose so he could deliver the finishing blow. A slash from Takeru's sword breaks Juzo's sword, and he falls into the water, satisfied that he found a worthy opponent. Takeru and the rest of the Shinkengers then celebrate his win over Juzo. Juzo has been a good rival to Takeru. While the two may be similar, Takeru fights to protect humanity from the Gedoshu, but Juzo fights out of a desire to satisfy his bloodlust, and he will do anything to find that opponent. However, when the two of them did duel, Takeru was the better fighter. However, another thing I want to talk about is the appearance of Super Shinken Blue. What I like about the Inromaru is that it's not just a red exclusive power-up, and the other Shinkengers are getting a chance to use it. I don't remember if Shinken Pink or Shinken Yellow got to use the Inromaru, but I guess we're gonna find out. This episode starts with Dayu being absent from Dokoku's ship when suddenly an Ayakashi Dokoku has never met before shows up. It turns out he's working for someone else, and he goes to the overworld to help cause despair. Chiaki and Kotoha are with Genta when they notice some people not moving. It turns out to be because of the Ayakashi. The other Shinkengers show up, but the Ayakashi uses his power on them. It turns out he has the ability to switch people's souls, and he's using it to put them into inanimate objects. However, Chiaki and Kotoha outwit the Ayakashi by having Chiaki switch souls with him to try and force him to reveal how to bring everyone's souls back. And then by themselves, they defeat the Ayakashi, first with Super Shinken Green and second with Daikai Shinken O. As I mentioned in a previous Shinkenger review, Chiaki and Kotoha have really good chemistry together. I remember the end of episode 3 where Chiaki wanted to become stronger than Takeru. I don't think he's there yet, but this episode shows how much he's developed his skills as a samurai, because it was his turn to use the Inromaru. Chiaki and Kotoha are also not the strongest members, but they made up for it by outsmarting the Ayakashi. I enjoyed this episode not just because it shines a spotlight on the dynamic between Chiaki and Kotoha, but because it sets up some new plot threads, such as Dayu's exile, and the appearance of a new villain who has his own Ayakashi under his command. I wonder what this new villain is like. Episode 28 is an episode focused on Genta, who has developed a fear of sushi after becoming one in the last episode and almost getting eaten by a cat. The Shinkengers try a lot of ways to get him to cure his fear, but that is not all that happens in this episode. This episode is also the proper introduction of the new villain teased in the last episode, Tsujigara no Akumaro. He seems to have fought the previous Shinkengers, but became stronger during the summer when Dokoku got new power. Akumaro seemingly swears loyalty to Dokoku, and then completely obliterates the Shinkengers. Then he summons a giant creation of his own, the Kirigami, but Tenku Shinkeno is no match for it. That's when Genta returns, revealing a brand new artifact he's been working on, known as Daigoyo. Daigoyo helps Shinkeno defeat the Kirigami, and it's revealed that Hikoma helped Genta overcome his fear by taking him by surprise and feeding him sushi. I remember that Akumaro was going to be one of the Shinkengers' most formidable opponents, but I didn't expect him to have explosive footballs as a weapon. I also noticed that he has no problem destroying his own foot soldiers. He has only been introduced, so I'm sure we will learn more about him later. But I'm pretty sure everyone knows it. He's got ulterior motives. He was acting too polite to Dokoku. As for Daigoyo, he is one of my favorite mechas in Shinkenger. I remember when I was watching Power Rangers Super Samurai the first time, and the Lantern Zord caught my attention. There was a lot of stuff from Super Samurai that caught my attention, but the Lantern Zord didn't talk because the higher powers in charge of Power Rangers are cowards. There is a type of mecha in Super Sentai that's hard to describe, but if I list down a few more examples, you might know what I'm talking about. Daigoyo is one of these mechas, along with Ninja Man from Kaku Ranger, Data's Hyper from Go Sager, and Tackle Boy from O Ranger, who I thought was from Go Onger, but it turns out I got him confused with another mecha. I feel like we don't see this kind of mecha in Sentai nowadays, and I don't know why. This episode starts with Genta and Daigoyo having an argument, which leads to Daigoyo running away from the sushi cart. The Shinkengers then encounter an Ayakashi sent by Akumaro with the power to create illusionary copies of himself. Mako then finds Daigoyo and talks to him, and then he and Genta make up in time for a showdown with the Ayakashi at night. Daigoyo uses his power to flash a beam of light and reveal the true Ayakashi, and the Shinkengers are able to defeat him. This is one of the better Mako episodes in Shinkenger. One reason I say that is because it was the introduction of Super Shinken Pink, meaning that Shinken Yellow, my favorite member of the Shinkengers, is the only one who's yet to use the Inromaru. It would be a shame if I had to wait 7 episodes in a movie to see it. Since the Lantern Zord is not a character in Super Samurai, I wanted to see how this episode was adapted. It turns out the episode was focused on Spike. Who's Spike, you may ask? Well, this is not a Power Rangers Samurai review, so I'm not gonna tell you. In this episode that focuses on Kotoha and Ryunosuke, the two of them go undercover in a school because a bunch of students are acting weird, and the Shinkengers suspect it might have something to do with the Gadoshu. With the help of Daigoyo, they find out that it was the work of an Ayakashi sent by Akumaro. The Shinkengers defeat the Ayakashi, and Daigoyo combines with the Shinkengers origami for the first time. Now, if there's one thing this episode is known for, it's the fact that the Ayakashi in this episode has an unsettling design. I think if the marionette on his chest was a different color, it would look less creepy. Another thing about this episode is that it was a Kotoha focused episode, which would have made it the perfect time to introduce Super Shinken Yellow, but instead we got Super Shinken Blue again. I like watching detective shows, which this episode reminded me of, so it was still a good one. In this episode, the Kusare Gadoshu return and take a kid hostage, so the Shinkengers have to take them down again. Other than that, there isn't that much plot in this episode, just like the Shinkenger movie. This episode is mostly there to remind everyone of the existence of the Kyoryu origami, which was meant to be for the movie, but this is still a good episode for the fight scenes alone. Another thing about episode 31 is that it has a lot more focus on Genta, probably to make up for the fact that he doesn't do anything in the movie. Shinkenger episode 32 begins with the Shinkengers origami missing, but then they're found next to a kid who's resting. The kid introduces himself as Hiro, and he came to get the Shinkengers' help in taming the Ushi origami, a powerful origami who went on a rampage and then got sealed in a mountain. However, Akumaru is also after the Ushi origami's power, and he sends an Ayakashi to deal with that. After the Shinkengers take Hiro back to the house of his clan, he runs off to the mountain and unseals the Ushi origami, causing it to go on a rampage. Both the Gadoshu and the Shinkengers fail to restrain the Ushi origami, and Hiro is trapped inside of it. I think this was an alright episode, even if the pacing was a bit slow. It introduced a new power-up that is going to help the Shinkengers a lot, and we also got the return of Dayu at the end. I was having a hard time watching this episode because I wasn't used to the slow pacing of the Ushi origami story. However, this episode is significant for the return of Juzo, who is revealed to have survived the end of his duel. He is recruited by Dayu, who has joined forces with Akumaro, and the two of them fight against the Shinkengers. Juzo also has a new sword because Uramasa is broken. Even though Takaru has already defeated him, we still don't know his full story. In the main plot, Takaru learns that Hiro carries the spirit of his father, who also wanted to unseal the Ushi origami, but then he died in an accident by the mountain. This reminds him of his journey of becoming Shinken Red, and then he fights the Ayakashi inside the Ushi origami and fully awakens its power with the original disc that was meant to contain it. The Ushi origami then transforms into Mogyu Daio and finishes off the Ayakashi with its giant laser beam. Alright, now that the Ushi origami story is over, I'd like to say that I'm not that interested in it. It wasn't as fast-paced as the other episodes in Shinkenger. I was only interested when Dayu and Juzo came back. I still think Mogyu Daio's finisher looks cool though. This episode is another episode that focuses on Mako, and just like episode 25, she doesn't share the spotlight with another Shinkenger. However, this episode did way better at getting me interested in Mako's character. In the episode, Mako is visited by her father, who wants her to quit the Shinkengers and come with him to Hawaii. But in the end, Mako shows him the importance of her role as a Shinkenger, as she and the others take on Akumaro and stop his scheme. In my previous reviews, I think it was obvious that I wasn't interested in Mako as much as the other Shinkengers. The thing is, I don't dislike her as a character. Whenever there was an episode focused on her, she would always be sharing that focus with another one of her teammates. So I wasn't confident that the higher powers would give her a moment that would help her stand out from the other Shinkengers. I'm glad to say this episode proved me wrong. Now that I think about it, Mako's episodes have been way better since the Inromaru was introduced. In this episode, Ryunosuke explores the consequences of him leaving the world of Kabuki to become a samurai. But that's not the important part of the episode. What makes this episode important is that it reveals that Akumaro is the one who made Uramasa and gave it to Juzo. Not only that, but Akumaro sends an Ayakashi with the ability to eat things with its arms. The Shinkengers try and fight him, but then Juzo and Dayu get involved, and after the Ayakashi finishes eating, they destroy him to awaken his second life. It turns out that the Ayakashi's second life gives him a nearly impenetrable shield, and not even Daikayo can defeat it. Ryunosuke then combines all the origami together with the Ushi origami to create the Shinkenger's ultimate mecha, Samurai Hao. Together, they finish off the Ayakashi, and that's where the episode ends. A lot of people don't seem to like the giant Sentai robos that combine every single mecha in the team's arsenal, but I have a soft spot for them. Samurai Hao does have its weaknesses, such as the fact that it can't move its legs, and it's clearly standing on a platform, but Shinkeno is meant to resemble a samurai warrior, so I think the platform was done intentionally because it's not just a platform, it's a throne, and Samurai Hao is meant to be a shogun. I also like the way the Shinkengers activate Samurai Hao's finisher by writing the kanji of all their origami. Speaking of shoguns, let's talk about Power Rangers Samurai, more specifically Power Rangers Super Samurai. Kuroninja's reached the part where Genta got a lot of focus. So let's talk about his counterpart from Earth 2, Antonio. Power Rangers Samurai was my introduction to Power Rangers and the greater sphere of tokusatsu, as you know. But the introduction of Daigoyo made me realize something. The Ebi Origami and Daigoyo are Genta's own creations, but in Power Rangers Samurai, the Claw Zord and the Light Zord were already in the Shiba household's possession before Antonio came along, and all he did was repair them. In an earlier part of this review, Kuroninja brought up that he feels like the themes of Shinkenger are diminished by some stylistic differences in Samurai, and I feel like the differences between Antonio and Genta are an example of that. But there is one thing that Samurai did well, and that was the introduction of Shogun Mode. I once thought that Shogun Mode was adapted from Shinkenger, and I was surprised to find out it's a Power Rangers exclusive thing. But what makes it even better is that as much as I think there are plenty of good Red Rangers, Shogun Mode is not just exclusive to the Red Ranger. Okay, we're back. Anyway, that is all for this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And by the way, I will be watching Shinkenger vs. Goanger next. And remember, I have nothing to do with Shironinja.